Hey guys, so my friend Thomas is playing black. They're gonna agree on a 5 minute game, and the National Masters playing white. So this was at the Montgomery Mall in Bethesda. Shout out DC Chess Association and Chess Empowers Girls, aka Girls Chess DC. This is the Sicilian. It's an open Sicilian, and Thomas is playing the Timanoff Sicilian. I'm not too familiar with the Sicilian, so I will not pretend to know too much. All I can tell you is everything so far is a book move. Everything so far. This is move 7. Everything's a book move. Actually, that might be move 6. But anyways, everything so far is a book move. This is the pawn move. This is the first non-book move, but it was the best move according to the engine. So obviously, guys, I have looked at this with the engine because they're playing so quick, and I'm not at their level, and I don't understand the Sicilian too well, so I had to look to make sure my commentary was good. See, that was a threat to that pawn that was hanging, but now the bishop is protecting the pawn. So, taking more of the center, trying to kick the knight. And so, National Master is slowly trying to invade Thomas, but Thomas is shifting his attack towards the queen side. There's this little tenet in chess. When someone's attacking you in the center, you attack on the sides, right? So, this is something that Thomas is really good at implementing. If you saw the title, Thomas is 2100, almost at National Master. So there's an exchange right here. So a knight exchange. Thomas presses forward with his pawn, taking space in the center. Let's say if they keep the tension, or if they keep the tension, the bishop goes. Thomas decides to take the pawn and exchange, and now see Thomas is fighting for space in the center. Notice that the king right there, the king side of white, National Master, the two pawns already advanced, right? So king side of National Master is not too protected. That being said, though, he does have a little bit more momentum towards Thomas, but it's so interesting. When I was filming this, I was mostly trying to make sure the shot was good. So I was really watching this game, but it's really cool to see it live when they take time to think, right? Time management is so important, and it's something I'm not good at with these quick games. I'll time manage wrong, basically. See, that's a check right there, a diagonal check from the queen. And very soon, there's going to be one move right here. Thomas is preparing for his next move. Basically, that move, initially the computer engine thought it was a mistake, but a day later the computer engine changed its mind and thought it was not a brilliant move. There's a technical definition for brilliant, but a good move, basically. So notice the queen being threatened by that pawn jump. So, where will Thomas go with the queen? So Thomas, notice if you keep your hand on the piece, right, that's the key, you're okay. But if you take your hand off the piece, you can't. I changed my mind anymore. So that's a knight attack of the queen, but Thomas decides to give up his bishop for it. That was a big long-range bishop, and that actually gets rid of a x-ray of the king. So this is the move right here. That, see, Thomas infiltrates with his queen now. And so Thomas wins an extra pawn for this. The engine initially didn't like that knight move, but it re-examined it yesterday when I was looking at it again. The engine really liked it. Basically, if the National Master didn't get rid of that knight, it would have been a fork, right? So the National Master basically had to do something. So notice the king right now of the National Masters has nowhere to go. It's stuck. So if Thomas can infiltrate, Thomas has a checkmate ability. So if you look at the engine, I'm sure around this time, it's already heavily in Thomas's favor. So, notice them taking their time, right? These are the crucial moments. Okay, Thomas presses forward with the pawn that's being protected by both his queen and his rook. And so National Master goes down to the 6th rank to threaten a pawn. So notice the rook's doubled on the E file. But does he have anything? And currently he doesn't, because everything's pretty protected. Both Thomas's second to last rank and Thomas's back rank. So that rook's now trying to threaten the queen. But Thomas has 3 escape squares. 2. The queen guards one of them. See, Thomas is escaping to the 4th rank. He could escape to the 6th rank too, but the 5th rank was guarded by the queen. When you're attacking, you don't necessarily want to exchange queens, right? Because very likely your attack's going to get hindered. So Thomas decides to ignore that pawn capture. So this is a queen exchange being offered. Will Thomas take this queen exchange? Now, if you look at the pieces on the board, Thomas is ahead of, let's see. I think he's ahead. Actually, no. Yeah, he's ahead 1 pawn. He's ahead 1 pawn. So Thomas decides to exchange queens. And let's see what the rationale is, because he can now get his rook to the 2nd rank. So that's an offer of a rook exchange. I like that the rook of the National Masters was sort of a little passive on the 6th rank. So Thomas decides to check, which leads to another offer of a rook exchange. And Thomas decides to threaten the bishop. So the bishop decides to go for a check. And now there's a bishop and a rook attacking Thomas and a pawn, whereas Thomas has a bishop and 2 rooks. So the engine, I'm sure if you put this in your engine, you will see that Thomas is ahead right now. So notice very good time management on both their parts. So Thomas decides to... Interesting that he didn't take that pawn on the 3rd rank, but let's see, because notice that bishop, right? That bishop is actually x-raying his rook, so he has to be careful. It's a quick game, guys, so obviously we have the benefit of watching this not under time pressure, not under stress, but that backward pawn is just... So Thomas decides to... Whoa. Okay, so there's a rook exchange offered that's accepted, and then Thomas takes a pawn. So Thomas finally decides to target that backward pawn. So National Master takes the open file. Okay. Thomas offers a rook exchange. Thomas... Okay, there's going to be more pawns taken. Unfortunately, Thomas is ahead. So, notice there's only 1 pawn left. Whereas there's quite a few pawns that Thomas still has. Notice that pawn's going to just advance. Will the bishop be in time? Yeah, look at that. So Thomas is attacking the bishop with his king, right? The king's very important in the endgame. Might be a discovered attack, so Thomas avoids a discovered attack by the bishop moving to reveal the attack from the rook. So now National Master knows he's in trouble, right? His king's mobility is very, very... Notice that interference move. Yes, good. Thomas captures the bishop. His own bishop was blocking the rook from protecting the enemy's rook. So, and then he can, let's see, can he promote? Oh, now he's gonna... Yeah, we might have to analyze this a little bit in the engine at the very end. But basically, Thomas had this. So this was Thomas's victory as black. Let us watch how he played as white. So this is mate in 1, but the National Master, of course, sees this. Thomas decides to protect his rook. If the rook goes here, you promote. the National Master's in a bind right now. King moves down here. Thomas decides to reposition his bishop. And this was a move that was inaccurate, but I don't think the National Master had much he could do. According to the computer, the best thing to do would have been just to give up your rook, but take this pawn and survive a little longer. And then that is mate. Guys, shout out Chess Girls DC. I didn't shout them out in my last video, so making sure I shout them out. And of course, thank you Montgomery Mall for giving us the opportunity and the space for this. Okay, Thomas versus the National Master, second match. Thomas is white. This match is awesome because it starts with the English Opening. The English Opening is something that I've been slowly learning. English Opening is a little bit of an asymmetric modern opening because it's controlling the board, the center from the side. So it's really cool to see Thomas play this. His style of play is very similar to mine, I guess. He likes to imbalance it. He likes to play with unconventional stuff. He likes to test different things. So anyways, National Master is black. And 5-minute game again. So first game, they sort of rushed through the opening, right? The second game, noticed them taking a little bit more time in the opening. And I think that's one of the beauties of playing this type of... I don't want to call English a hypermodern opening, but an imbalanced opening maybe. You got to think about it more. See, Thomas is really taking his time in this one. So there is a bishop. Exactly. Kick the bishop. So there's an exchange right there. And now the G file is opened up. So Thomas repositions his queen. And potentially there's a future attack on the castle structure of black. And one thing to notice right now is National Master's light squared bishop was a little blocked, was a little limited. He did move his pawn to support that forward pawn, and now got a little bit more space to maneuver. Thomas is taking the center and kicking the knight. So both of them are castled, and it looks like the fight's mostly going to be in the center. There is a backward pawn, right, which Thomas decides to attack. So there's a capture with a tempo on the queen, which the queen decides to capture a pawn, which now gained a tempo on the knight, which was solved by the rook protecting the knight on G. So National Master has the knight in Thomas's space, but Thomas has the queen developed and some pawns controlling parts of the center. So there's probably a bishop move eventually. So Thomas gets his rook closer to the center. And now there is a pawn move to protect that knight. Thomas decides to gain a tempo on the other knight. So National Master decides to ignore it by threatening the queen of Thomas's. It's a good little thing to remind yourself. You don't always have to deal with the move at hand if you potentially have a better move, right? Another tempo on the queen, and actually it centralizes the knight. Notice the knight's being protected by the pawn, and the knight protects the other knight. So at this point, I would say positionally, probably National Master's a little bit better, but probably pretty even. If you look at the engine, which I haven't looked at since that night, I believe there was a move where could have been much more advantageous for National Master around this time, but I'm not going to pretend I remember it. So National Master decides to put some tension in the center, which Thomas decides to resolve. So now the rook's in the game, and 3 pieces plus some pawns attacking. And Thomas has the bishop, the rook, the queen, the knight, and a pawn. That pawn right there, that forward pawn, looks very dangerous. Thomas is attacking the rook. So National Master decides to exchange rooks. Wow. All the rooks are off the board, guys. And notice Thomas still has his light squared bishop there. So both of them have their light squared bishop, but Thomas has a dark squared bishop too. Thomas has one knight. So it's a 2-knight versus 1 knight and a bishop. So I said that wrong. It's 2 knights and a bishop versus 1 knight and 2 bishops. There we go. Very better time management in this one, right? It's really kind of cool to see them. So we'll analyze the very end of this. I remember the very end of it very clearly. But how we got there, I don't remember. But the very end of it, actually, if Thomas, actually, I'm not going to spoil it. We'll get there. We'll get there. But basically, the move that Thomas finds, actually, if it were a longer game, would have led to a draw. So we will see how this goes. Thomas taking his time. Decides to attack with kingside pawns. National Master decides to take a pawn. And now the queen is in the action. So the bishop is protected. The dark squared bishop is protected by his queen. So he decides to just say, take it, take it. And Thomas has mate if he goes to E1, right? So technically black should be on the other side, so they didn't flip the board around. They just switched the pieces, if it makes sense. So normally that would not be E1, right? It would be an 8. It would be on the 8th rank. But again, for those of you who don't worry about that if that didn't make sense. But a lot of times you don't want to flip the board. You just want to like set it up real quickly. Anyways. So obviously National Masters thinking about this, right? He's thinking about this. And he himself, does he have any checks? He does have a check, but notice Thomas has the light squared bishop, right? It can block a check very easily. So there's nothing that he can do really to... So yeah, exactly. Protect my back rank. That's probably the only move he's got. And now Thomas decides to... Oh, yeah. Look at this. Look at this. Thomas knight exchanges. And notice the board is very open, right? So Thomas having both his bishops is actually very, very beneficial. It's really cool to see it from this angle. Look at that light squared bishop. Look at how much scope it has. So that pawn is definitely annoying our National Master a lot. So Thomas's other dark squared bishop is not doing much. So Thomas gets his king a little bit more protected to prevent any checks to gain tempo. And now there is a threat on that forward pawn that's very invasive towards the castle structure. So Thomas decides to do a trade. He gives up his light squared bishop. And this right here is, I believe, we'll analyze this later, but National Master basically tells him that Thomas would have had it. And I think National Master ran out of time anyways. So we'll explain this last part. So we'll start here when National Master decides to go here to get rid of this pawn that's annoying him. So this, according to the computer, was a big blunder. And this is a blunder that Thomas capitalized on immediately, right? Exchange. But now, watch this. This is actually where Thomas had a mate in 2, but under time pressure, he actually didn't find the right move. So Thomas went here. And the reason why this is completely a draw is because the queen can go here. You see that? And that threatens this right here. If Thomas ignores it by going here, watch what's going to happen. He'll take, and that's a check. Our man has a perpetual check. You see? Just perpetual check it, and he's going to be able to save this game. See that? However, because of time pressure, the National Master wasn't able to respond to this. So how Thomas could have won the game was do this first. The reason this wins the game is now the queen can't go here to protect because his bishop is also attacking this square. National Master has done the next move. He's got nothing. Even if he does this, let's say he captures, well, I still have mate here. On the 30th, there's apparently another National Master vs. 20 type tournament, so I'm going to definitely be there. Let's see how well I do against this National Master. So see you guys on the 30th.